Do you think there are more than two sexes?
I believe that there's a definition for intersex as well that I want to acknowledge. But sex is assigned at birth.
I'm just trying to understand. I'm thoroughly confused. So you're born, I'm talking about biology, male, female, and what else?
I believe that intersex is also acknowledged. But again, I'm not a doctor here. What I can
And
say
what does intersex mean?
is that there's a difference between sex and gender. And I think in these conversations, we're conflating the two.
Well, but I want to start with sex, okay? There's male, there's female. When a baby's born, before the baby has had time to even have a sense of self, there's male, female, and intersex. There's a third sex?
I believe that is true, but I would defer to Dr. Lopez as I'm not a physician.
Okay. And how many genders are there?
Okay. Did you just see that? Because I need a moment. What you just watched was Senator John Kennedy in a Senate hearing, genuinely trying to get a straight answer on some pretty basic biological questions. And what did he get? Circles. Tangents. Everything except a direct answer. Now, before anyone comes at me in the comments, I want to be clear. This is not about hating on anybody. Senator Kennedy said it himself, and I agree. People should be free to be themselves. What you do in your private life is your business. But this hearing is about fairness in sport and basic biological fact. And what we just saw was someone testifying before the United States Senate, refusing to acknowledge something most of us learned in middle school science class. Kennedy called it out exactly the way it needed to be called out. Stay with me because we are watching the full video and I have a lot to say. If you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications because we don't shy away from the real conversations on this channel. Let's get into it.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of our witnesses here today. Ms. Robinson, I want to follow up by trying to understand your answer to one of Senator Cruz's questions. And this is really a question, not a suggestion. Do I understand your position to be that there are two sexes, but there can be more than two genders?
I wouldn't even say two, and we've got Dr. Lopez here as well, but there's also the definition of intersex. I think that often in these conversations we're conflating sex and gender, and I do want to affirm here that trans women are women. That is their gender.
Okay, but I'm trying to understand. Do you make a distinction between sex and gender?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Explain that. Do you think there are more than two sexes?
I believe that there's a definition for intersex as well that I want to acknowledge. But sex is assigned at birth.
I'm just trying to understand. I'm thoroughly confused. So you're born, I'm talking about biology, male, female, and what else?
I believe that intersex is also acknowledged. But again, I'm not a doctor here. What I can
say what does intersex mean?
Is that there's a difference between sex and gender. And I think in these conversations, we're conflating the two.
Well, but I want to start with sex, okay? There's male, there's female. When a baby's born, before the baby has had time to even have a sense of self, there's male, female, and intersex. There's a third sex.
I believe that is true, but I would defer to Dr. Lopez as I'm not a physician.
Okay. And how many genders are there?
I think the gender is expansive, and the definitions are always growing. Today I can tell you, I talk to young people that talk about non-binary as...
More than five?
I think the gender is not a binary, is what I'm trying to say.
But are there more than five genders? I'm just trying to understand. Are there more than five genders?
Well, I think that there was a time where women wearing pants didn't feel like it was appropriate for their gender, and yet I'm wearing pants today. I think that there are ways that we express our gender that are expansive.
Are there more than five?
I wouldn't subject myself to naming how many genders there are, but what I can say is that gender is a reflection.
Number?
Excuse me?
There's an infinite number of genders?
I think depending on your culture, there are a lot of different genders that exist. And I can also say that it's a term that's evolving. If you look at young people today, they really don't lean into the binary of only woman and man. So I think that it's incumbent upon us not to legislate on this, but create space for them to explore what their identities are, what their gender identities are.
Let's get back to athletics. I think I understand what you're saying. There are three sexes: male, female, and intersex.
I believe that to be true, but again, I'm not a physician.
And
so
there are an infinite number of genders, because gender is a mental state.
Gender is about expression, and I think that there are a variety of ways that you can express your gender.
Okay, so there's infinite number. All right, let's go back to the biology. Male, female, boy, girl, okay? Biologically, do males have an advantage over females biologically in sports?
Again, I'm not a physician, and I can't speak to that.
What's your real-world experience?
It depends. I mean, there are some people who are born male that I'm faster than if I were to sprint against them, and some that I'm not. Some males that are taller than some women, and some that are shorter.
You don't believe that a biological male has a physical advantage in sports over a biological female?
Not as a definitive statement.
Give me an example. Well, no, I don't think. How many female members of the NBA do you see?
Well, I can say that, there's been this news article about men that think that they could beat Serena Williams in tennis, right? That they think that they could actually score a point on her. And it's just not the case. She is stronger than that.
What's your experience, Ben? Male, female?
Both Serena and Venus lost to the 203rd ranked male tennis player, which they're phenoms for women. My experience, my husband, he swam at University of Kentucky as well. In terms of accolades and in terms of national ranking, I was a much better swimmer than him. He could kick my butt any day of the week without trying.
Okay. I just think, Ms. Robinson, I'm trying to understand where you're coming from. I think you lose a lot of credibility when you don't concede that a biological male has physical advantages over a biological female. I mean, I just think that's a proven fact, and you really hurt your credibility. I understand you want the world to be a better place. I do too, and I don't think people ought to be discriminated against because of an immutable characteristic. I don't. And I think that I think everybody ought to be free to be themselves. And what you do in your bedroom or what I do in my bedroom with a consenting adult is nobody's business. But if what I do in my bedroom with a consenting adult, if I decide I want to tell somebody's child about it, then other people have rights too. And I think parents have rights. And I think biological females have rights to be able to compete fairly in sport, in sports. So I really think you hurt your credibility when you refuse to acknowledge that biological males have an advantage over biological females. It kind of makes me wonder about all your testimony. Thank you, Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Kennedy. I'm sorry, go ahead.
What I'm trying to say is that there is not a definitive advantage in all cases. Sir, I don't know if you believe that you could beat Serena Williams in tennis, but I probably think that that's not the case. There are not all cases where all men are physically superior to all women. And at the end of the day, in this conversation, we're not talking about that. We're talking about trans women who are, in fact, women, who deserve to play in a gender that matches their sports, who deserve all the benefits that Ms. Gaines is talking about. And as a cisgender black woman, I can say definitively that my womanhood is not threatened by a transgender person asserting hers as well.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank all of the persons who are testifying today. For Ms. Robinson, do you know what...
Full video. Watched it. And my first reaction has only gotten stronger. Let me start with what Kennedy actually did well, because it deserves credit. The man was methodical. He didn't come in aggressive. He started simple. Do you distinguish between sex and gender? Fair question. Ms. Robinson said yes. So he followed the logic. How many sexes? 3. Fine. How many genders? And that's where it fell apart. The answer was essentially infinite, depending on culture, always evolving. And look, I understand gender identity is a complex and personal topic. But when you are testifying before the Senate on policy that affects real athletes in real competitions, infinite and evolving is not a workable answer. You cannot build fair rules around something with no defined boundaries. Kennedy saw that immediately. Then came the sports question. Do biological males have a physical advantage over biological females? And Ms. Robinson would not say yes. She kept redirecting, talking about individual variation, mentioning that some males are slower than her in a sprint. That is a deflection, not an answer. Nobody is arguing that every single male is faster than every single female. The question is about statistical biological advantage at a competitive level, and the science on this is not ambiguous. Testosterone levels, muscle density, lung capacity, bone structure. These are measurable differences. This is physiology, not politics. And here is the part that really got me. Ms. Robinson herself said that despite having better accolades and a higher national ranking than her husband in swimming, he could beat her any day of the week without trying. She argued against biological advantage and then proved it with her own experience in the same breath. Kennedy didn't even have to push on that one. Now, Kennedy's comments about credibility were direct. Some people might find that harsh. But I think he was being honest in a way that was necessary. If you come into a Senate hearing and refuse to concede scientifically established facts, you make it very hard for people genuinely trying to think through these issues fairly to take anything else you say seriously. And that hurts the broader conversation, not helps it. Because there are real and legitimate discussions to be had about how transgender athletes can be included in sport in a way that is both respectful and fair. But those conversations cannot begin from a place where biology is treated as optional. Kennedy also made a point near the end that often gets lost. He drew a clear line between personal freedom and public policy. What you do privately is your business. But the moment it affects how children are educated or how female athletes compete, other people's rights come into the picture too. That is a fair and reasonable point, and it deserved a direct response rather than a pivot. Ms. Robinson's closing point, that her own womanhood as a cisgender black woman is not threatened by a transgender woman asserting hers, is a genuine and heartfelt statement. But the debate was never about whether anyone's identity is threatened. It was about whether competitive fairness is compromised. Those are two completely different conversations, and Kennedy kept trying to have the second one while the first one kept getting in the way. Kennedy came in with patience, logic, and a clear line of questioning. I think the exchange speaks for itself. Let me know in the comments what you think. Did Ms. Robinson make any points Kennedy failed to address? Was he too direct or did he handle it right? I want to hear from all sides. If you enjoyed this, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next one.